In this video, we are going to address some of the popular misconceptions that people have about Christianity down through the ages. You may have heard, for example, people saying that Christianity is the cause of all the wars in the world. Well, we're going to look a little bit closer at those kind of claims. Now, one of the powerful things about Christianity is not just that the gospel is true, but that we believe that Christianity makes a radical transformation and change in our lives. And we can all share testimonies about that. But then how do we deal with the objection that in societies where large numbers of people claim to be Christians, in societies that even officially claim to be Christian cultures, why is it that we get evil? Why is it that we get slavery? Why is it that we get wrongdoing? And so we have to address that issue. So, for example, what about the Spanish Inquisition? How could that happen in a Christian society? And what about slavery and the persistence of slavery in Christian cultures? And is it true that Christianity or even religion is the cause of most wars in history? There's probably several fundamental misconceptions we need to address here. One is to treat Christianity as if it occurs in a vacuum. In one sense, we are all the children of the age in which we live, and we are all shaped to some extent by the surrounding culture around us. Now, yes, Jesus does bring transformation, but that is a gradual process. And I think all of us have sometimes had those aha moments when we've suddenly realized that we had attitudes that were not Christ-like and were owed more to our surrounding culture or other factors rather than our Christian faith. In fact, it's a matter of shame that sometimes Christians have been so influenced by their surrounding culture and haven't been influenced enough by the transformational power of the gospel. Also, when we're looking at some of the evils that have occurred, and very real evils in so-called Christian societies, we shouldn't make the mistake of assuming that other societies, for example, pre-Christian pagan societies, were wonderful paragons of virtue with the noble savage concept. For example, when colonialists arrived in Latin America, there was great harm done, there was slavery, there was exploitation, and there was cruelty. But we should also remember that the culture that existed there beforehand practiced human sacrifice on a massive scale, including plucking the beating hearts of victims out of their bodies while they were still alive. So this leads us to a further point, that very often the problem is not people's Christianity, it's human nature, which we know from the Bible is actually deceptive and sinful. And so even societies, where you take away Christianity, that doesn't make society better. It often makes it worse. It often makes it more cruel. For example, take the Spanish Inquisition. It was a horrible thing. Over a period of about 200 years, more than 10,000 people lost their lives. It was brutal. It was horrible. And every one of those 10,000 lives lost was an absolute tragedy and a disgrace and a stain on the name of Christianity. But taking Christianity out doesn't prevent those kind of things happening. So, for example, in China, whenever a communist regime tried to eradicate Christianity, it didn't make society kinder. In fact, in Chairman Mao's China, between 1958 and 1962, it's estimated that there was a needless loss of lives of anywhere between 18 million and 45 million Chinese citizens. during the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward. Now, what that means in real terms is this. Yes, the Spanish Inquisition was a horrible thing. But the numbers that died in the Spanish Inquisition during the Cultural Revolution, that same number of people died every day between breakfast and lunchtime. That brings home the fact that trying to take religion out of the equation doesn't remove the problem of human cruelty. Also, a genuine reading of history, rather than trying to read history just to prove our point of view, shows that there were always Christians who behaved in compassionate ways, even in the midst of cruelty. So, for example, during the colonial exploitation of Latin America, the monastic orders working there did everything they could to protect the indigenous people, including going to the extent of getting the Pope in Rome to pass a papal bull excommunicating anybody involved in enslaving indigenous peoples. Now, ultimately, the forces of power and greed brought about a change of attitude, and many of those efforts of the monastic orders didn't produce the results they should have. But you always had these people with a deep faith in Christ who were doing their best to change the situation, not being part and parcel of the cruelty. And that really brings us to a crucial issue, which is between being culturally Christian and being a Christian by conviction. Because great swathes of people are cultural Christians. Even Richard Dawkins has described himself as being a cultural Christian who likes to go to church at Christmas and sing traditional Christmas carols. But we wouldn't make Richard Dawkins responsible for the failures, as we see it, of Christianity. So you have convictional Christians, you have cultural Christians. And when you take an issue such as slavery, you see a clear distinction here. You know, we know of no instances where somebody was against slavery and then had a powerful personal experience with Jesus Christ, and as a result of that became a proponent of slavery. We don't know of any historical examples ever of that happening. And yet history is full of examples of people who were involved in the slave trade and then came to a personal faith in Jesus. Their cultural Christianity became a convictional Christianity, and they became powerful agents for abolition. Let's take the idea that Christianity or religion is the cause of all wars. Actually, a number of academic surveys have revealed that approximately 7% of all the wars ever fought in history had any kind of a religious component, even as a minor component. Just 7%. Now, when you think that half of them, 3.5% of all wars fought, were Islamic wars of context, and you can hardly blame Christians for that, plus there have been wars fought over other religions as well, the number of wars where Christianity has had even a minor role is actually very small indeed. Now, don't misunderstand me here. Even one war where Christianity played a role in it happening is one war too many, and that should be something we should reflect on. If we don't recognize that kind of thing, how can we ever do better in the future? But the idea that Christianity or even religion in general is responsible for all wars or even the majority of wars is actually totally false. A final misconception in discussing the role that Christianity has played throughout history is to ignore all the good that it has done. So many of the useful and positive things we have in society, whether it be hospitals or universities, came about as a result of Christians seeking to help others. Slavery was eventually abolished in Europe and North America primarily because of evangelical Christians living out their faith. This makes a difference. And this overflowed into other areas of life as well. For example, most people know that William Wilberforce, because of his Christian beliefs, became the primary force for seeing slavery abolished in the British Empire at the time. What a lot of people don't know is that Wilberforce's Christian compassion overflowed into other areas as well. He was one of the founders of the first ever animal welfare organization in the world, what is now the RSPCA. And he was also one of the founders of the Royal National Lifeboat Institution that still is saving lives around the coasts of Britain and Ireland. You see, this was part of the good that one man's Christianity was able to produce in the society around him. Even some of the things that we take for granted today, such as the idea that we should have good working conditions in factories, that we don't have children climbing up chimneys in dreadful conditions, the idea of workers' rights, the idea of having welfare systems, these all owe their development to Christians who wanted to make a positive difference to the world in which they lived. When you look back to the start of Christianity, the Roman Empire was unbelievably cruel. It was where cruelty against animals and people was endemic and considered good education. It was a society where the rape of slaves and children was not just considered possible, but was considered normal. It was a society that none of us today would ever want to live in. And the reason why we're not living in that society, to a great measure, is because of the influence of Christianity and the gospel. And for that, whether we're Christians or not, we should all be grateful for.